All right, y'all, you're Locked On Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today I am joined by Jarvis Davis, the co-host of ATL Day Ones. We're going to be talking about how the Falcons pounding the rock down the Bengals' throat is their key to victory. We'll also be talking about how the Falcons fill Casey Hayward's shoes as well.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, and the humble host of this Locked On Falcons podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, more odds than lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So we thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day, Monday through Friday, free and available on a variety of podcast platforms like Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and of course, on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube. Give us a like, hit that bell, and you will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. So as usual, guys, we have none other than Jarvis Davis. You hear him every day on the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast feed, one of the hosts of the ATL Day Ones podcast alongside Tanitra Batiste. And Jarvis is here with us to talk about the biggest key to victory coming into this Week 7 matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. Jarvis took time out of his busy day to come in and share with us his wisdom. And so, Jarvis, I give you the floor. What for you is the biggest key to victory for the Falcons entering Sunday?
I think when you think about just kind of looking at some of the matchups, like because on ATL Day Ones, we talked about what Dean Pease has to deal with as far as the different matchups and everything. His wide receiver group, we know how really good that group is together, and throwing in the running backs there to catching the ball in the backfield as well. I was just like, okay, like how can the Falcons take advantage of the Cincinnati Bengals defense? Now they're not world beaters, but they do give up probably almost giving up 5 yards a pop in the run game. And when you're talking about every time you touch the rock, like you can pick up a first down in two runs. Those are some of the things that we know for a fact that the Falcons are going to have to take a look at because they're dealing with some injuries in the middle of that defense as well. Logan Wilson has been out, and Josh Topu is and DJ Reader has been out as well. So right there, and that's the meat of the defense, right? Those are interior defensive linemen, that middle linebacker. Those are the guys that are, vital to, being that stalwart up front to uphold against the run. And I think that when you have those guys out, potentially being out for the game as well, those are some of the things that I feel like the Falcons are going to have to take advantage of. And I think you're going to be looking at a guy like Drew Dahlman, Chris Lindstrom, and Elijah Wilkinson. Those three guys on that interior line, they're going to have to win up front if the Falcons are going to be able to take advantage of that.
Absolutely. Like we see the Cincinnati team give up 200 yards rushing, 228, I think, to the Saints last week. You watch that game, and the Saints were able to run the ball at will. The problem for the Saints was, that Bengals offense showed up at the right time late in that game. And of course, Jamar Chase had the big 60-yard touchdown to come back and win. And that's the difficult thing when you face this Bengals team where they have that sort of explosive capability. We saw it in the Super Bowl where they were able to get back into that game with a big play to Jamar Chase. So basically, we'll talk a little bit later about, how this cornerback room is going to match up against those weapons. But I agree with you, Jarvis. If the Falcons can control the clock and just hopefully, prevent a 60-yard touchdown to Jamar Chase in the closing minutes of the game, that should be a winning formula. I think the Saints showed that last week. It did. They just weren't able to finish, and we'll see if the Falcons can finish this week. But on that note, we'll talk and move the conversation a little bit ahead to that cornerback room and how the Falcons can slow down this very talented receiver core. AJ Terrell's dealing with some injuries. Obviously, Isaiah Oliver's dealing with some injuries. Casey Hayward is out potentially for the season with the shoulder injury, and we'll talk about some of the young guys that'll be asked to step into the lineup to deal with not only Jamar Chase but also T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. Hail the pit on Tyler Boyd, but we'll get into that as we continue today's episode. But since of course I have Jarvis here, I got to plug the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family, which Locked On Falcons is part of. Locked On Hawks, Locked On Braves, Locked On Bulldogs, but Locked On Sports Atlanta is also the home to 3 shows breaking down local sports as well as national sports. That's A to Z with Mark Zeno, Hitting Hard with John Chuckery, and of course ATL Day Ones with Tanitra Batiste and none other than Jarvis Davis. You can find Locked On Sports Atlanta as well as the other shows free and available on all the same podcast platforms you're listening or watching Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. And if you check out Locked On Sports Atlanta on YouTube, you will also get the Locked On Falcons postcast where Jarvis and I immediately come on immediately after the Falcons final whistle on Sunday to break down the game and give you our immediate thoughts on the game. So subscribe to Locked On Sports Atlanta. Hit that bell, give us a like so that you know when we go live. And guys, I want to talk to you a little bit about SimpliSafe. It's a company that I have a very intimate relationship with because 8 years ago I had a break-in in my home and I didn't have a security system at the time. And so I went out and got one, and I got SimpliSafe. And the main reason I got it at that time, because it was the most affordable option to me, but the main reason I've been able to keep SimpliSafe for the last 8 years is because I absolutely trust their service. I love that SimpliSafe is customizable for my home as well as yours. Whether you're looking for a bare bones security system like I got 8 years ago, they got you covered. If you want to upgrade to all the bells and whistles with the wireless HD security cameras, you get smoke and leak detectors. If you're worried about your pipes freezing, they got detectors for that. They got you covered there at SimpliSafe. Your security and your safety is the only thing that matters with their cutting edge technology powered by 24/7 professional monitoring agents who will always have your back, dispatching police and first responders at the moment of a threat or an emergency, even if you're not home or can't be reached. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes by going to simplisafe.com/lockedonnfl. Save 20% on your SimpliSafe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. Just visit simplisafe.com/lockedonnfl to learn more. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. So continuing today's Locked On Falcons, guys, which we thank you for making your first listen. Always recommend your second listen being potentially Locked On Sports Atlanta or Locked On NFL, especially on Fridays where you get the NFL key predictions, breaking down the 5 biggest matchups heading into the weekend, including Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football. Plus, you're going to get betting advice from leading experts like BetOnline. Follow NFL key predictions every Friday on Locked On NFL, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. So talking here with Jarvis Davis of ATL Day Ones on the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast. And I want to talk a little bit about this cornerback group. We talked about how the Falcons offense can do work against this Bengals defense, but obviously we also want to see how this Falcons defense handles this Bengals offense. We know that the strength of the Bengals offense is that potent passing attack. The Falcons are dealing with some injuries at the cornerback position. Casey Hayward being out, AJ Terrell being limited in practices, Isaiah Oliver returning back from IR. So, the Falcons aren't necessarily at 100% full strength going into this game. And this is not necessarily a game where you want to be under strength, although T. Higgins and Jamar Chase are also dealing with some injuries. We're at that point in the season where everybody's a little nicked up. But I also wrote about this this week over at the Falcoholic, and sort of Casey Hayward's absence kind of works as like an extended audition potentially for young guys like Darren Hall, young guys like D. Alford, where the Falcons, when they signed Casey Hayward, it was clearly, given his age, it wasn't a long-term solution for that cornerback spot opposite AJ Terrell. And now there's an opportunity for someone like Darren Hall or D. Alford to potentially step in and take Casey Hayward's job long-term while he's out of the lineup. I really liked what Darren Hall did last week in limited opportunities against the 49ers. We've all seen D. Alford make plays as well late in the game against the Browns, as well as other times. But it's going to be an interesting matchup against this very talented Bengals receiving core. Jarvis, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on with this cornerback room heading into this matchup? We already know the Jamar Chase, AJ Terrell battle is going to be, World War III at this point in time, given their past. But what are your thoughts about this Falcons cornerback room's ability to match up with this Bengals receiving core?
To be honest with you, I'm interested to see who runs at the nickel to start off, and I'm more than likely maybe D Alford, but like he had a little knick-knack earlier in the week, so we're trying to maybe figure out where he's going to be, because I'm interested to see Isaiah Oliver and how he kind of works, his way back, as obviously working his way back into the lineup last week in the pick right before the half against the San Francisco 49ers. But you like to see that, because I think that one thing that I thought was really cool is with Arthur Smith, and he was going through the post game, going through one of his press conferences, he was talking about how, like, we don't dress 48 guys to have 33 of them to sit on the sidelines and just twiddle their thumbs. Just like, we dress the guys because more than likely they're going to play, or if there's a situation because of given whatever the game plan is week to week. So I think that the Falcons are prepared for. Obviously, you don't want Casey Hayward to go down for potentially the entire season, but like, if he does, like, you do have some guys that can come in and play some football, because D Alford, think about where he came from, CFL, and playing at a D2 school, and then you got a guy like Isaiah Oliver, who was considered a bust essentially, for quite some time, and then until DPs was like, you know what, let's move you down inside. You can tackle really well. Oh yeah. Oh, he actually is serviceable at the nickel spot. So you have a lot of guys who already had that mindset, saying, whatever the situation is, we're gonna go out here and play ball. So I think these guys will be able to handle the Casey Hayward going down. Obviously, you don't want Darren Hall auditioning for the opposite spot this early, because you like to having that veteran presence in there. But I think that, with the test that they have coming up this week, we'll find out really quickly whether or not Darren Hall is going to be able to handle it. Now, obviously, he had a nice test last week with Brandon Ayuk and having a really, really nice play on that deep ball. And I think he's going to have to be prepared for that, because with AJ Terrell and Jamar Chase going at it, obviously Joe Burrow's going to take his shots with that matchup, but he will definitely be looking backside to whoever Darren Hall will be guarding, whether it be T. Higgins or Tyler Boyd. They line him up outside as well. I think that's going to be something to watch, because I know Joe Burrow will try you. He's going to hold on to that ball to take a shot downfield time and time again, which is going to be vital for the defensive line to make sure he's not back there all day, and take advantage of that still offensive line that hadn't quite figured it out yet.
Yeah. I think we will see this defense challenge, and we will see if they can rise to the occasion there, particularly with Darren Hall being probably the guy expected to play that right cornerback spot, filling in for Casey Hayward. One of the knocks I had on Darren Hall coming out, and why I was like, I don't know if he has the size to really play on the outside. And that's why it made sense to me when the Falcons drafted him in the 4th round. I'm like, oh, well, they clearly see him as a nickel cornerback. And we saw him kind of struggle making that transition last year for the first time in his career, because he was exclusively playing on the outside in college at San Diego State. But it does seem like he's made that jump in year 2, particularly now that he's being asked to play on the outside. But T. Higgins, one of the biggest receivers in the league. But the thing you can say about Darren Hall, he's got a lot of practice going up against guys like Drake London in practice. So I think this week he can basically make people like myself that were a little skeptical of him coming into the league, shut up and be like, hey man, the guy is playing well. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of that, as you mentioned, the defensive front can take a lot of pressure off of those guys on the back end if they can get that pressure up front. Grady Jarrett, that was something we talked about on yesterday's crossover Thursday with the Locked On Bengals guys. We'll see if Arnold Ebiketie can build off another strong game against the 49ers. So those guys can help each other out. All of that group can help each other out. And we'll sort of wrap up today's episode talking about that group and their bend but don't break identity that Dean Pease is all about. He's he said in his presser on Thursday, he only cares about points, doesn't care about how many yards he gives up. We'll also talk a little bit about the Falcons, run game as their sort of identity on offense, and sort of if the Falcons can just continue to basically be this same team that we've seen through 6 games for the rest of the season, and sort of what their ceiling is for that coming up. And we'll get into all of that as we continue today's episode, guys. But I want to tell you about BetOnline, the number one source for all your sports betting needs and info this season. Whether you're looking for the latest player developments, matchups, podcast news, in-depth articles, or analysis on every game, including this weekend's NFL slate, where you have the Falcons being 6-point underdogs against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Falcons are 6-0 against the spread. Will they go 7-0 covering that spread and potentially win against this Bengals team? We'll find out. Maybe you're into, what's going on with the Hawks versus the Magic on Friday night. Well, BetOnline is the perfect place to check out your sports wagering information, including live in-game betting for every sport: NFL, NBA, college football, MMA, boxing, golf, so much more. Olympics coming up. Yeah, head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. So continuing today's episode, guys, I want to tell you about Roku and Amazon Fire TV. If you're, a big fan of Locked On Sports Atlanta, I know Jarvis is, and myself as well, you can get that same great local sports coverage 24/7 and for free by downloading the Locked On Sports Atlanta app today if you have Roku and Amazon Fire TV. So, Jarvis, I talked with Kevin Knight of the Falcoholic earlier this week about sort of the sustainability of this football team and sort of their identity being that very run first offense, almost exclusively running the football. It seems like it's at various points in the game, and that sort of bend but don't break defense. And I just kind of want to pick your brain on this, where we've seen this Falcon team sort of play that style of football. And, outside of week 1, they've shown a lot of resiliency, that ability to finish in a lot of these games, even when they get down in games. I'm curious, do you feel like that's something that the Falcons can continue to ride and continue to rely on, each and every week? And, sort of what is kind of your expectation for, the sustainability and a potential ceiling for that style of football?
To be honest with you, I believe that one of the things that when you talk about identity when it comes in football, like for me, I believe that thing, it can change from time to time, right? There are a lot of teams that are talented enough to have multiple identities, like they can, there are some teams who are good enough that can beat you in multiple ways. But when the way this roster is currently constructed, with all this dead money and having a bunch of prove-it guys on the roster and a lot of young guys who haven't proven themselves in the NFL, like you have to be able to find a way to win and stick to that, and and hope that you don't have to counter. And I think that, and Arthur Smith kind of talked about that this week when he was to one of the local radio station. He was saying how he's confident that if they have to throw the football, he believes Marcus Mariota can do it. Now, I don't know if I necessarily believe that. Like, I believe that when it happens, but running the football and playing bend but don't break defense, and I'll add another caveat to that, a bend but don't break defense that turn teams over, like, and give short fields to your offense to work with. It's a lot easier to have to run the football 5 times to get in the end zone versus 14. You know what I mean? So all those things it's kind of like almost like a match made in heaven, right? And I'm sure it's not by chance that it happened, because when you have teams who possess the ball longer, that means your defense is not on the field. And guess what? If the Falcons defense isn't on the field on Sunday, that means Joe Burrow isn't on the field on Sunday. So all those things like that, I believe that are sustainable, to answer your question. It's just a matter of who actually gets you to the point where you have to, have to counter. Like if the Bengals make them counter, I mean, they're not the best defense in the league. Now if last week, if against the San Francisco 49ers, you have to counter, that's a totally different ball game because, if you had a couple guys on the field, that means more than likely Marcus Mariota going to be in some trouble. But I think that it's sustainable, to answer your question. And when you get to a point where you're going against teams who are kind of at or at the same level or maybe a little bit better than you, I think you can find ways to figure things out because you have guys, playmakers like Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and you'll be able to figure that thing out because they're not necessarily world beaters on defense.
Yeah, I think that's a great point there, Jarvis. And I'm really interested. Obviously, we'll keep having these conversations each and every week here on the pod, as well as in these sort of postcasts that we do on Locked On Sports Atlanta. Make sure you subscribe. And we'll see how these things develop. But I'll be very fascinated, a month or two from now, to see like how are we talking about this team and how is this identity still going strong for this football team, or have they been forced to morph and play a different style, or has it just sort of occurred naturally, where I think that's kind of what Arthur Smith would like to see, and you started to see the beginnings of that with a much more clean and efficient performance from Marcus Mariota next week. And that's one of the things that people note about the Bill Belichick Patriots, which is the team that you face in week 1 is going to be very different from the team that you face in, now week 18. And I'll be very curious to see if we see a similar development process for this Falcons team. I think that's the plan, and we'll just sort of see if they can fulfill that plan. But any other thoughts, Jarvis, on this team and this matchup heading in the weekend before we close out today's episode?
Be honest with you, man, we kind of mentioned it earlier, man, but I think that Grady Jarrett has the potential to have another game, that another type Grady Jarrett type games, because like Joe Burrow, he can be sacked 21 times, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Like that's a lot of sacks, man. So he, like I said, like remember I was talking about how he likes to throw the football, hold on to the ball. That could be a good thing for a defensive lineman that can rush the passer. So I think that if he can take advantage of that, and I would love to see Arnold Ebiketie get a little bit more PT. We'll see whether or not he starts. That could be something to watch as well. If he starts again, or if Adi Ogundeji is healthy enough to get the start, and if Adi gets the start, I want to see AK-47 in there on third and long every time. Like I don't want to see 92 in there. I want to see what 47 can do.
I agree with you on that. We'll leave it at that. But Jarvis, always appreciate you coming on, and look forward to our conversation Sunday to sort of react to whatever we see. Of course, guys, again, check out Locked On Sports Atlanta. Subscribe on YouTube so you can get that postcast live. Hit that bell so that you know when we go live. And of course, subscribe to all Locked On Sports Atlanta shows like Locked On Hawks so you can get the lowdown at this promising start for the Atlanta Hawks. It was a disappointing finish to the Braves season, but see sort of how they can turn the page and get better and be back in the mix next year. And of course, we'll keep an eye on the Bulldogs to see how they continue to see if they can sort of defend their title on Locked On Bulldogs. And guys, also check out Peacock and Williamson each and every day as to get the coverage of all the other 31 NFL teams, Locked On NFL, Locked On Fantasy Football. If your fantasy team's not doing particularly well, especially if you use that early pick on Kyle Pitts and you're like, hey man, can we get some touchdowns or something? Vinny Ayers got you covered there. Locked On Fantasy Football, guys. But we will be back. Jarvis and I will be back on Sunday for that postcast. Really appreciate you guys tuning in for another episode. Yeah, that's it, guys. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend. Till then.